you come at everything from a very research-driven perspective, always even keeled, not making like headline type statements. These are definitely like books to read and say, "Holy cow!" and then something to go back to refer and figuring out how
Hmm.
to solve the problem. So I commend you for that. But why
Oh,
this book and why now?
that's a great question. For me, this was about going deeper into health because, as sort of obscure as metabolic health might sound, it's actually very integrated into general health, including mental health. There's a lot going on with what's called metabolic psychiatry right now, but it's also metabolic health and the way our body uses energy is very involved in women's health as well.
I'm sure
Yeah.
there's some sort of correlation you can speak to. Is you've got these hormone changes,
Yeah.
greater risk for insulin resistance, and all these different mood changes and other changes that are happening to our body. Um,
Yeah.
is that why it's so important to even be more careful about what we're doing? Is because there's all this imbalance and it's really the insulin resistance that we're trying to avoid?
It's a recalibration. And during recalibration time, symptoms can arise, but also menopause can be a tipping point because it's such a time of such change. Kind of small deviations from normal, or sort of going off the rails a little bit, can actually turn into a much bigger problem long term, if that makes sense. A bigger
Yes.
problem long term than would happen is if the same challenges had happened during a more steady state. And so the nervous metabolically flexible, I'll just quickly say, it just means you're able to access and burn your own body fat quite easily for energy. And the way to be metabolically flexible is to not have insulin resistance. So with perimenopause, um, we basically, well, we lose first progesterone and then estrogen in that order. So, but even in the early phases of perimenopause, when we're mainly losing progesterone, we already start to get some pretty serious like changes going on with metabolic health. One group of researchers called it the metabolic upheaval of perimenopause. It's a if like at the you look at the biochemical level, insulin levels potentially going up. There's more inflammation. Some triglycerides and cholesterol might be going up. That sort of thing. And then there will start to be a redistribution in body fat from the bum to the visceral fat, from the bum to the belly. Basically, you start to get this. You lose the hourglass shape and start to get more of a square shape, a thickening through the waist. That's relative androgen excess. That visceral fat is also called android fat because it's promoted
Okay.
by testosterone. So it's not that testosterone goes up with perimenopause. What's happening with androgens or testosterone generally through our lifespan is they're on a linear, just slow, gradual decline through life. Like they
Mhm.
peak when we're teenagers and then they just start to go down. Through our reproductive years, progesterone and estradiol are having this actively every cycle, and especially during pregnancy, kind of anti-testosterone effect. We're exposed to relatively little. But then with
Okay.
perimenopause, because mainly starting with losing progesterone. And so we start to be more at risk of insulin resistance. And then in later phases of perimenopause, when estrogen drops as well, then there really is like a potentially a shift to insulin resistance or a much greater risk of insulin resistance associated with increased visceral fat. There was one statistic that on average, I think women on average gain like 50% more visceral fat, which is incredible. Like with the
Wow.
menopause transition, it's a lot. So when women are
Okay.
like, saying, "Okay, my this feels weird, like my body is changing shape. What is this hard ridge under my rib cage? Like, what's happening here?" That's hormonally what's going on.
Right, there's a whole so you
Yeah.
talk about, like, the normal things of what our hormones do to define our body, and you speak about
Yeah,
different body types and things like that. This has nothing to do with being thin. This is about
correct.
being healthy and having the right fat where it needs to be to feel good and not
Right.
have diseases. Okay, I just wanna make sure
Perfect.
that just
Yeah, no,
especially if
it is
yeah.
yeah. It's a really good clarification, and I know it's a really touchy subject for that
It
reason because
is.
we've all been bombarded by decades of, "Oh, you should look this certain way," and yeah, that's obviously, yeah, not what we're saying exactly.